All right, Mr. Gray, if you want to kick us off.
Sure, sure. Good afternoon. It is afternoon, right? Afternoon, everybody. Forgive me, it's my evening time already over here in Glasgow. But good to see you. Good to see all our CSYO students and CSYS students from this year and our prospective students, those who are tuning in with us for the first time. We have a real treat of a session today. Not only do we have a quadrant or sort of disparate quartet of your colleagues playing the excerpts from the auditions coming up in just a few weeks. We also have a very special guest who's going to be coaching them and giving you a lot of really great information and insight. And I'm super excited to gain some knowledge from him as well. We're joined by Maestro John Kennedy, who is a composer and resident conductor, as well as the director of orchestral activities at Spoleto, USA, which will be kicking off in just a few weeks, I guess. But I guess maybe Maestro Kennedy, if you wouldn't mind just sort of telling us just a couple of things about you and just to introduce yourself. But so happy you could be with us today.
Well, thank you, Kellen. It's great to be here. You know, Charleston has a special place to me. I've worked with the festival for many years now. I live out in California. I'm in Oakland, and I just, you know, I come to Charleston every year for the festival period. I love it. And I'm so excited to see you and to hear some of you musicians playing today. As a composer, I have a perspective of always loving to figure out what a composer's intent is when they're composing a piece of music. And then as a conductor, of course, I want to help realize what those intentions are. And so it's been a wonderful journey for me in music. I played in a youth symphony myself when I was young, and it's just great to be with you today. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. So I guess our first candidate up, playing our first violin excerpt, the first of our first violin excerpts, is there are two of them. Would that be Miss Chloe Ross?
Yes, hello.
All right. Awesome, thank you, Chloe. Well, I guess we'll leave it to you. You'll be playing could you tell us, remind us which excerpt this is, the Mendelssohn Symphony No. 5, and what the excerpt is?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Chloe Ross. I'm a junior at Ashton Hall. I've been playing in CSYO for 3 years. And today I'll be playing the Mendelssohn Symphony 5 Movement 1 excerpt from Concerto E, or Concert E. What's it called? Is that what it's called? Right? Letter E. Letter E to 11 after F. There we go.
There you go.
Wow, thank you. There's a lot in that, isn't there? in that passage. Really, really nice job. And if I could just start by saying, you know, one thing when it starts at letter E, right there at the beginning, this is incredibly sort of detailed, like in the expression markings, right? And not all of the musicians can see the music here, of course, but you know, you've got a crescendo to a sforzando and then a diminuendo in that first 3-measure group, right? So and you want to, this is a passage where it really has the opportunity to show the expressive quality of your playing too, just before it turns into all the fireworks later in the scale passages. Yeah. And so just like in the first, I guess it's like 12 measures of the passage, give real close attention to those dynamic contrasts and feeling like you can put the weight on the emphasized notes, the sforzando notes, which are a way of accenting it, and still feeling like it's like singing the melody here, because it really is expressive. And it's a nice way to set up the fireworks that follow, it gives you an opportunity to play really expressively. Yeah. You want to try a little bit of the first part of it again? Yeah. Yeah, great. Go all the way, go 4 more measures to the sforzando D. Okay, starting at E again. Really nice sensibility. Good. Good, Chloe. So that's really, I really feel that now, even through Zoom. And so the one thing one little bit word of caution is to keep your rhythmic integrity, right? Like, don't make the high E last longer than a measure. Still keep that pulse, because it flies along actually, even though we want to feel the expressiveness of da 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 da, and then so that's the first thing I had to offer. And again, too, keeping the rhythmic integrity of your long notes in the where was it? Yeah, in coming ahead later on in the passage. So let's do the whole thing one more time, and then we'll look at some of the passage work, okay? Yeah, great. So terrific. Yeah, really terrific. I really felt that time. I have another thought. When we get to the third system on your page of the excerpt, where we have the 8th note descending scale on the forte for 3 measures, and it's repeated for the pattern is repeated there. So for me, I like to hear that grow, that it's more emphatic each time. And you're doing a great job of putting some energy on the downbeat. But it's like in classical music, in which so much of the music has the relationship of conversation between the different parts. Yeah, a lot of the melodic material is conversational, and so when a phrase gets repeated, it's nice to make it a little bit different or to grow it. I mean, and that can be a stereotype, but in this passage, it's really meaningful because it's like there's an implied crescendo here, and and if you're saying the same thing 3 times, and if we were making emphasis in language, we would make emphasis in language, and we would make emphasis in language. And so it's the same thing in music. If you're making that statement 3 times, you want to grow it and really go towards the peak of the passage. And so often too in music of this era, the dynamics are not completely notated. I mean, that's true in music of all eras to some extent, but in recent years in contemporary music, composers become so meticulous about writing the dynamic of every note sometimes. But in classical music like Mendelssohn, there's really room for you to grow that. And of course, that becomes part of how you communicate with your colleagues in the orchestra and your conductor in terms of feeling those dynamic changes and where the music's going. But in this case, when you're playing by yourself, you can show that you're almost like the conductor. You're interpreting it and demonstrating you really know the piece that way. So if you wanted to start it up, you know, from the, where are we? Like 10th after E or somewhere in there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17 after E or something, where the 8th note passage start, and try what I just suggested. That might be fun.
The CBA.
Yeah, thank you. Terrific. Yeah. You really sound great, Chloe.
It's more fun.
Yeah. Wow. Kellen, have you all discussed Felix Mendelssohn's sister Fanny?
No, we've not actually. Not a single day we haven't in CSYO.
So I was doing some of her music. I gotta just have an anecdote here and for y'all, okay? I was performing some of Fanny Mendelssohn's music last year, and so I did a lot of research into her. She's his older sister, and she was a composer as well. And by all historical accounts, she was the most talented musician in the family, right? But back then, opportunities for women to be composers or professional musicians were much more limited, and if not unheard of in many respects. And so Fanny, what's interesting about this symphony in particular, Mendelssohn Symphony No. 5, you'd think it was his last symphony, but it's not. It was published last. And so it's actually the second one he wrote, and he was only 21. So he was a young composer, 21 years old. And he never really cared a lot about this piece. Like, he didn't advocate for it a lot, but Fanny advocated for it a lot. And it's known that she may have composed some of his earlier works. And we don't really know how much of this symphony Fanny may have composed or influenced, but there's probably a lot. There probably is. And the older sister helping her younger brother with his symphony, right? Or maybe composing big chunks of it. We don't know. So all this to say, with this symphony, I think it's a really interesting sort of musicological question. And we all need to be spending, thanks to musicologists now, we're all getting more information. People are doing more research into whatever historical things still exist. But Fanny was a fantastic composer in her own right. And there's a symphony that she composed that's really, really fun and extremely passionate. It's reminiscent of the opening passage here at E. Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Chloe.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
That might be a nice. That might be a nice programming suggestion for CSYO this year, in fact.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Next contestant up, I think, is Lauren Wiggins, playing, is it Symphony 83, an excerpt from Symphony 83, Lauren?
Yeah, it is.
Oh,
It's
terrific.
from letter A to measure 30.
Terrific, Lauren. Thank you. You did such a great job, like with the dotted rhythms and keeping them like stylistic and rhythmically accurate. And also just your attention to the articulation and markings are just really excellent, really excellent. So you know, this is an interesting passage because, you know, you're playing the main melody and theme, and you know who you're playing it with?
The violin.
That's right, yeah. And so you've got the whole violin section playing exactly the same notes, and you're adding the flute on top. And actually, I think the second violins, are playing an octave lower. So it's like, this is like a triumphant, you know, or like a big, strong melody that's really strong in these late Haydn symphonies, with an orchestra. So you can really, I think it sounds absolutely extraordinary when a flute can project over on the top of this in terms of your color, but also just being aware that you're playing this with the violin section. And so one thing I'd like to ask you to try, and this is sort of similar to one of my comments for Chloe, was about growing notes progressively, like giving them a directionality. And that even starts right there at letter A. I always do that too, number A, letter A. At letter A, those first three notes, bum, 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 yeah, and taking them to that, they're not even, right? I mean, it's dull to have that sort of sound, just sounding flat. And so to think of that growing, and then to give that rhythmic energy to sort of a directionality, especially too when you get to the repeated B flats, you know, that they're moving in a sense of forward motion, if you will, without rushing, if that makes sense. So try the whole passage again and think about that sort of quality of directionality, that even though it's a lot of repeated notes, you want to give it, make it feel alive that way. Fantastic. I really heard that. Thank you. And I also just think your sound is really great here. Now, what about tempo, Maestro Gray? Do you have a feeling about what tempo we're hearing?
You know, I do this symphony at a rather brisk tempo. And share a secret, I've actually done it before with a few of the students. And so that may be my tempo that she's giving you there. But so generally that's about in the range that I do it, but I know some people actually do it quite a bit slower. Do you have specific thoughts on it?
I was going to say even a tad faster, if it were possible. Yeah. Dun, 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 dun. Since it's marked spiritoso, or yeah, you know, that it has you know, a sort of a drive to it. Yeah. But I just wanted to I just was curious if Lauren was in the CSYO ballpark.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. I can't quite remember how fast we did it before with the group. Maybe Lauren, do you remember? Was a little faster, a little slower than what we're doing it now?
I think it was a little bit faster.
Yeah.
Good for you. Okay. Then you've hit the spot. Yeah. Yeah, and this symphony, of course, well, later in this symphony, later in this movement, I guess, is where the symphony gets its subtitle of the hen. Yeah, and the dotted rhythm itself starts to sort of that sort of starts to give a foreshadow of the theme, which is the hen clucking, right? But with great elegance, because it's Haydn. Yeah, you sound really beautiful and polished. You know, that the sound quality of your playing. Yeah. Maestro, do you have other comments?
No, not in this case necessarily. You know, I think, you know, you hit it right on the head with something that I always look for in a passage like this. Obviously, I picked it because of the dotted rhythms of really finding that the students can very accurately place the 16th against the dotted 8th. but
Right.
also a matter of breath support for holding a phrase like that and being able to, as you mentioned, grow the phrase despite the constant repetition of notes. Because as you mentioned, Haydn doesn't necessarily lay out the dynamics and the phrase markings for you. So you really have to sort of, I think it really shows off the how intuitively a student can feel where the music is, which I think Lauren's done an exemplary job of here. Yeah, I always wonder, and maybe if you have a little thoughts on this, of what is the difference here in getting a sort of a Haydn-esque, more classical sound, as opposed to what we're used to playing, a little more Brahms and Wagner and a lot more heavy later composers. I think Lauren does a really good job of having a really wonderful sound here, but I wonder your thoughts on that and what you might bring to an audition.
Yeah, I agree with you very much. I think that with in terms of that stylistic aspect of it, which you just described, with early classical music like Haydn, and the so-called father of the symphony in terms of writing this so many symphonies in this form, got up to 83 here, and there's over 100. Is that you really do want to think of how the melodic lines and the melodic material have an elegance and a certain kind of conversational aspect to them that in which like I was saying, that the dynamics aren't marked, but the music always has shape. It always has shape and flow, and a lot of that has to do with not so much like accents or changing volumes, but it has to do with the way you feel the weight of a phrase, the way you land and put primary notes of a phrase, just feeling the music in your body as if you might be just putting natural kind of expression into it in terms of how a phrase grows and lands. And so and that I think becomes part of how the music stays light at the same time too, that it's not too heavy, and that it's an opportunity too to play all instruments in Haydn like with a really nice full tone, but without playing loud. And that way everyone can hear each other and communicate, and an orchestra can really become like a chamber ensemble that's expanded, when everybody's phrasing the exact same way. And that's one of the challenges in Haydn too, is that so much of the music is tutti, shall we say, or a lot of unisons across the orchestra. And in this case, you need to be playing with the violins, and in some passages it becomes a little even trickier in that you might even want some of your phrasing to emulate the bowing that the strings are doing, just in the way the bowing sounds. And so I mean, that's my thought on Haydn, who I absolutely do. I have so much fun doing Haydn. I don't know about you, but it's really enjoyable music to perform.
Yeah, I always think of the Haydn symphonies as like candy for me. You just get when I'm studying scores, it takes so long. Like I'm studying a Scriabin piano concerto right now, and it's taking me quite a bit to get through it. Whereas a Haydn symphony, it's just like candy. I sort of just burn through it and enjoy the lightness of it and the comedy of it, and also the drama that contrasts the comedy.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. Well, terrific. Thank you, Lauren.
Really great job, Lauren. Thank you.
So I believe our next contestant up is Margie Moore, taking us back to the Mendelssohn Symphony.
Hi.
Hi, Margie.
My name's Margie, and I go to School of the Arts. I'm a sophomore, and I'm going to be playing 6 after K of the first movement of Mendelssohn 5.
Terrific job, Margie. Yeah. little hard to hear the quality of sound with Zoom, at least where I am. But you really are all over this excerpt. Sounds terrific. Yeah. Wow. So where do we start? I mean, this is an incredibly passionate passage with, where it starts forte and then it's marked to have like a sempre stringendo, getting faster with crescendo all the time. And then all of a sudden you have this pianissimo that's marked agitato, where the character just changes into this very passionate sound. So one of the problems that I've always thought about with this here is the short notes that start the passage. And Maestro Gray, I would be curious on your thoughts on this as well. But when you see a dot over a half note, mm-hmm. What does that tell you, Margie? How are you thinking of it?
And like kind of put on the top of the beat, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, technically it's like a staccato marking that takes the value of the note in half to reduce it to a quarter. But because it's marked on a half note, why isn't it not just quarter note rest with a short note, or like played more dry? And I've always wondered if the half note itself is intended to show that the note has a full value, but it still has the aspect of having a short attack to it in terms of how it's bowed and how we hear it, how it helps serve the crescendo, frankly. And so to me, we almost want to hear it like da off, da off, da off, da off, like that we at least hear. That's the wrong way to describe it, but we want the short note to still have more body, to take more time, if you will. Am I describing that well, do you think, Kellen?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's always peculiar, right? As you're mentioning, when there's a dot under a half note or a note that's longer than a quarter or something that's more than one impulse. And I think as you're saying, it's sort of, when I think of dot, I think of it as definitely determining that it's detached somehow, but under a half note, there's still some sort of body to the note, as you're mentioning. And, whether there's, and even though you might be taking your bow off the string or stopping the bow to make a separation, there's still some sort of resonance that continues. And so in the case of a violin, whether that's you giving it a little bit of extra waft, as John's mentioning here, to sort of carry the sound, or whether you're actually intentionally crescendoing or something in between there, but there must be some sort of continuation of the sound. And honestly, in an audition, I think it's great if you can acknowledge it. Of course, it's going to be up to the conductor when you're in rehearsal, but it says so much for the conductor that's adjudicating your audition if they notice that you notice that. And I think that's the main thing.
Right.
When you're seeing an excerpt that's this detailed, it has so many instructions in it.
Yeah, you described that so well. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. So why don't we try that much, and going up to up to the pianissimo agitato. Just try that much of the opening of the passage. Yeah, I'm starting to feel it. And can you do it one more time and try to keep that same, maybe we're losing some of the resonance through technology here, but keep it as you go higher in the passage too, that you keep the crescendo growing, that we really feel it growing, okay? Yeah, beautiful, fantastic. Now, and then this next passage where it's the pianissimo agitato, again, it's like it's very like what we might call Sturm und Drang or storm and stress of the late classical, early romantic music, and the with a chromatic passage, you know, that's turned into, that starts to wander and try to find a melody. Yeah. And so again here, using these extremes of volume from the pianissimo to the very strong crescendo, that fortissimo in the fourth measure of that phrase, and then coming back with a subito piano again growing to a fortissimo. Let's do that again and really give a close attention to all of these dynamic contrasts, if you would. Sorry?
The whole excerpt? Do you want me to play the whole excerpt?
Why not? Because that'll get you in the mood, right? Starting from the first measure. Yeah. Yeah, good. Keep that vibrato going on all those low notes, you know, the left hand. So a couple little rhythmic hiccups, of course, that you're well aware of. Let's, if you will, give yourself another chance with the passage, starting with the, how about the third system of the excerpt on your page, the eighth notes starting with the B flat? Why don't you start there? Okay, thank you. Thanks, Margie. Yeah, so with the four measures of the forte passage, starting with the C sharp, yeah, you're losing a little bit of rhythmic intensity through there. That's the only spot where I feel like the rest is getting a little long in terms of your reset to play the figure again. And so try starting at the same spot and keeping the energy feeling like it's moving forward, and that you're starting with a forte that maybe even could be you know, saving some to have that crescendo to the fortissimo. I mean, it's not a big difference in volume, and so you need to be able to make that crescendo happen, not just with volume, but in the intensity of your playing and the direction of the line, and making sure that it doesn't lose tempo or rhythmic energy, so that that crescendo happens in part through your energy more than your volume. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, terrific. I felt that time. Yeah, good. This is tough. Yeah, and you've done a really nice job with it. Yeah.
If I could step in just a little thing here, thank you so much for all this, John. Like Margie, you know, when you prepared an excerpt like this to such, I guess, detailed preparation, it's sometimes we have to get really granular to find something for you. Like, wow, I mean, great job. You know, just to help you with some of this, John mentioned the sort of at the pianissimo agitato, the storm and drawing of it, and the melody's like trying to find itself or find where it is here. It's really odd to find pianissimo agitato. I find I don't come across it a lot of times. And so that's something really special. And I think you kind of have to just think about it's. If I saw that immediately in an excerpt, I would think how. And so you start thinking about not just the volume, but also the tone, and maybe the pacing at which you play that, because again, you think about it, how agitato can 4 quarter notes be in pianissimo? And so my thoughts might be the conductor might be doing something with the time. And so I'm not normally a big proponent of telling a player to change the time when it's not written, but I think that's another opportunity for you to show that you noticed that marking there. So maybe if you gave it a little bit of like dee da 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 dee da 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 dee da 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 or something like that, it kind of helps it, as he's mentioned before. And then one other really, really granular thing, just for thinking next level on this, I think like 1, 2, 3, third line of this excerpt, starting with the B flat 8th notes there. You know, you've got, what is it, 3 sforzandi in that line. And I think you wonder, like, what is the character of each of those sforzandi, and has it changed from like the first one to the third one? You know, and they may not, it may not have, but you know, I think about the ones that are probably at the quarter notes are a little more broad and expressive, and maybe less punchy than the ones that would have been on 8th notes, just because it's like da 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 is where the 8th notes are, and then a little more singy. But I don't know. But it's really, it's not for me to prescribe to tell you like how to do it, but again, just thinking about how when you see those things and just expand upon it, because I think if you're in an audition setting and somebody can just see that you thought about it, that goes a long way, really long way.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I would agree, Kellen. And thank you, Margie, for letting us get granular like that. That shows how far along you've taken the music. So congratulations. And I mean, it's really true how much there is on the page. So much information there. And it's also true that for any of you, when you're taking an audition, as Kellen mentioned, it's a chance to not just demonstrate how you play your instrument, and how you and the right or wrong notes approach that you take to playing those notes on the page, but it's a chance to demonstrate how carefully you've digested the musical material there, and also to demonstrate that you know the musical whole. You know the passage that you're playing and how it fits into the whole piece. And it's almost as if the person listening can hear the whole orchestra, because you're animating it so much in your own playing and making it seem like you're not just playing an excerpt or auditioning, you're doing a mini performance. You're extracting this beautiful little chunk from a beautiful whole. And we can hear the whole piece almost in our imagination. And I got that from you, so thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Before we move on, if I could say one more thing, there's something I just noticed about this excerpt that we've been using for 2 years, and I've played the symphony a number of times. I never noticed this. If anybody's looking at the excerpt or the parts here, the last 4 bars, those are the only half notes in the excerpt that have the horizontal accent, as opposed to all the other ones have the dot under them. And so
Yeah.
I think in this case, when I wonder, like, what does that tell me? That probably tells me these are the only ones that have a full value. Because you know, we discussed earlier that they're detached but have some sort of resonance or body. Perhaps these are the ones that, like, just looking at the instructions here, instructions,
Yeah.
quote unquote, that maybe these mean all the way into the rest, as opposed to what the other ones mean. So it's
Yeah.
just so many details, and you know, just anyway. Anywho, I think our final contestant here would be Athena Gossett, playing a timpani excerpt from Tchaikovsky Symphony 1, third movement. Tricky third movement.
Right. So, because I realized most of the other people were naming like which measures they were playing, I had to run over and count and write down which measures those were. So I am playing from 16 measures after letter I and ending at 16 from the end.
Athena, this is Kellen. I'm so sorry. I think, could you try it one more time for us? And Even though if it's marked, would you mind, don't play the first note quite as loud, just because I think it overloads the Zoom the speaker or the microphone, and
Okay.
it makes it a little more difficult to hear. So, you know,
Okay.
just alter that one little thing and let's just see what happens.
Okay. So like the very first note, or like the first note of each phrase.
Oh no, just the very first note, because I think we heard that one so
Ah.
loud and clear, and then the microphone sort of
Okay.
shut.
Yeah. Is that better?
It's a little bit better. It's yeah, I don't know. It's just a tough Zoom thing. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Um,
didn't have any issues during the sound check. Is it possible that any of your settings might have changed?
Possibly.
Because
Let me-
when you played through it that first time, we had no issues hearing the excerpt all the way through. But this time,
How did that sound? Did that sound any better?
That's better.
we could hear it. Yep.
All right. Cool. Take 3.
Okay.
so
Hopefully we'll be able to hear it this time. I just had to turn on the original sound, which I forgot to do when I logged back in.
Okay. Great. Yeah. Thank you, Athena.
No problem.
That work. I just love seeing timpani like in a house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was when I moved up to high school, my high school. Oh, sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I am a junior. I've been playing in the CSYO for 4 years, and I go to Hanahan High School. And when I moved up to high school, my school didn't have any practice rooms that I could wheel the timpani into. So, to help me be able to get in more practice, my percussion instructor just loaned us his set of timpani, so it's just been sitting in our house.
That's fantastic. That's
Thank
great. So this is great. So this is such a wonderful passage at the. This is like Tchaikovsky's First Symphony, third movement, near the very, very end of the movement. It's about a 7 or 8 minute movement, I think, and it's one of the first, I think, timpani solos in the orchestral repertoire, like where you get a solo here in starting in that fourth measure of the excerpt, right? And so the composer is giving you this gift of a solo at the same time that it's really challenging because it's on these low pitches G and C, and it's really hard to keep it articulate, right? And it's hard for me to judge that now on Zoom, obviously, to a certain extent with the resonance of timpani, but it looks like you're using a very hard or dry mallet. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
And that's
the most staccato mallet I have.
okay, fantastic. And then do you do any muting with your fingers or hands, or have you thought about using any like chamois cloth or sometimes the things that timpanists will use?
Yeah, I am. The main places that I did mute were at the very end, where it had the rests and with the 2 staccato notes at the end. But I believe I have used like a cloth or maybe even my hands in past pieces that we've done, just with how fast the rhythm goes and with needing both hands.
Right.
It's kind of impractical to do that on an excerpt like this.
Right. So, and that's obviously a situation. It's a passage where, what the conductor might prefer in terms of the sound quality, but also the hall that you're in and the acoustic, like how resonant it is, in order to just make sure that the rhythm is distinct. That's the main criteria here, I think, because frankly, the 2-measure phrase da 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 is what the whole movement is about, that 2-measure phrase. And so we need to, if the timpani is going to be the primary voice in the coda for the end of the movement, we want to have that rhythmic energy be very clear. And I've heard it muddied up, by other players. And it's like, whoa, we've just heard this wonderful, sparkling, light, clean music. And all of a sudden, for 7 minutes or whatever, and all of a sudden it sounds muddy, because
and
the
it ends up
the
just a big mess.
Yeah, and because the timpani sound isn't dried up enough, and at the same time, you don't want to take the tone away. You want it to have a beautiful tone quality, but you still want it to make sure that you have that balance of articulation that fits the room that you're in and everything. And maybe that involves putting a little piece of leather chamois or something on a place on the head to reduce the vibration. Now, I have a question for you. Are you right or left-handed?
Right.
Right. So your primary strong hand is the right. Okay. And so with the left hand, is playing the low G, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so sometimes you want to bear that in mind and just make sure that in a larger circumference drum, the larger drum needs a little bit more energy to activate the volume evenly. And so you might want to give a little bit more weight to the G if your left hand is your secondary hand. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Especially when the phrase alternates as it does where the G is on the beat or on the downbeats, so that you feel that the G is as strong as the C. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, the other thing that I think is curious about this passage, and Kellen, you might have a perspective, but throughout this movement, the rhythmic figure is written with an accent on beat 2 of the first measure and then on the downbeat of the second measure of the phrase. So in other words, that phrase that begins where it's marked solo, da ga da da ba da ba, right? It's if it was written the way Tchaikovsky had written the rest of the movement, there would be an accent on beat 2, da 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 da, and an accent on 1 of the second measure. So it would be da 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 da, like that. And so I feel if I'm conducting it, I want it to be played that way by the timpanist as well, and because then it's more consistent musically with everything that's come before. And, you may not want to take that liberty as a solo performer, but it's something to definitely bring up and ask your conductor about, because to me, it is necessary and in keeping with the character of the movement. And you never know if the reason the accents aren't there is just because Tchaikovsky overlooked it or an editor overlooked it. We can't make assumptions that what's published is actually what was really in the composer's mind. And so to me, it would be more faithful if that passage then had that accent on 2 and 1, just in the way you interpret it. And it's subtle, but it's important that, not all the notes are even, shall we say, but those 2 are brought out. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Now,
And
here's the other, go ahead.
to me, it's kind of interesting that you mentioned an accent on the beat 2, because when I was practicing this, I just had my metronome doing the consonation at 1 2 3 1 2 3, and when I just had static with no accents on the downbeat, sometimes I found myself kind of flipping it in my head, hearing beat 2 as the downbeat, like da 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 da, instead
Okay.
of really feeling where beat 1 was. So I think it's kind of funny that
Yeah.
in a way that's kind of how it was intended to be.
Great. Well, your rhythm seemed to be, from what we can tell through Zoom, your rhythm seemed to be excellent. So, and really completely solid through the entire passage. Now, the last thing that's really important here is that the solo of 4 measures, it's a 4-measure phrase, and then it's repeated at a lower volumes. What is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. So for those of you who may not see the music, it goes from forte to mezzo piano to pianissimo to 3Ps to 4Ps, the same passage. So you've got to create 7 different dynamic levels of the same 4-measure phrase, right? And so it's not a perpetual diminuendo. Don't think of it that way, because then you're losing these 7 terraces of volume. And the other part of it is that you don't want to get too soft too soon, because you are carrying the energy of the coda, and you can keep that volume up. And the last, and so you want, so that you make each of those 7 volumes different, and you really save the soft for maybe the super soft for the very end, while still keeping it rhythmically clear. And then the last thing I'll say about this is, sometimes for me, and maybe I'm just eccentric, but
I mean, I am
sometimes, okay, thank you. So I sometimes don't think about volume levels like this as their names, like forte, mezzo piano, etc., because that squishes all the piano volumes into very small ranges of distinction, because you've got mezzo piano, and then you still have 4 more levels of piano to go, or soft, shall we say. And so I think of it not necessarily as forte down to 4Ps. I sometimes think of it as 7. I would think of this passage as, my first volume is 7, my second is second, my third is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, so that I can think of them like in a different kind of conceptual framework. Volume 7 is my loudest, the 6, and then I really hear each of the 7 different volume distinctions differently if I think of them as a number rather than a musical term. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's one thing that I sometimes do in my own brain when I think of even scaling the form of conducting an orchestra and scaling the form of a piece. I think of the different sections that way sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, you sound great. I hope I can hear you play timpani in person rather than through Zoom. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. Well, bravo, Athena. That was fantastic, and thank you, John, for all that insight. That was I just
Sure.
learned myself in thinking of the way you terrace dynamics in a number system.
Yeah.
When I thought about this passage, or many passages that are a terrace, crescendo, or diminuendo, they're like dimensions of space. One's closer, and then it's getting farther away and farther away and farther away. But that's so much less precise than a number system. So I'm going to borrow that. That's fantastic. And I have to say, and just for Athena or any other percussionist or prospective percussionist here, one of the things, or one of the reasons that this excerpt was picked, and I think Athena was really getting onto this, as far as sometimes feeling like beat 2 is actually the downbeat, or the beat with the most emphasis. And as John was mentioning, the theme for the movement is da 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 dee da 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 dee da da dee da da. It really sort of shows if you can feel the groove. If I can say it that way, as a big fan of like Bobby Womack and Isaac Hayes and Barry White and all, so on and so forth. Is that sure, you can play it metronomically as it exists, and I wouldn't count that against you, as playing the excerpt as it's written. But I think it does, tend to tell you something about the musician if they can very accurately play what's on the page very clearly and distinctly, but can also really show how well they feel it. Because I think that's a lot of, if I'm going to give groove a definition here musically, it's really feeling the strongest and most important points of emphasis over like a continuously repeating pattern. And so obviously, as Sean mentioned, like if you're looking at the first beat, first measure where it says solo, the emphasis is on beat 2 of that bar, and then the downbeat of the next, and then beat 2 again, and then the next beat. And if you can really sort of make us feel that, it really shows that you can feel the groove. So, groove's an important thing for a percussionist, but yeah.
It really is. And it's also, I might add to that, I really agree with you. It's also really important in Tchaikovsky for the whole orchestra, because Tchaikovsky symphonies sometimes have like rhythmic eccentricities that are a little hard to feel, like where a primary beat isn't necessarily the downbeat. And I've seen excellent musicians not necessarily get lost, but make mistakes in Tchaikovsky. You'll sometimes see professional musicians really have trouble with the counting in a Tchaikovsky symphony, just because it's sometimes awkward the way he phrases the groove. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah. And in terms of just like feeling it as a groove, I personally come from more of a rock kind of background. I'm a guitar player as well. And so sometimes it even helped for me to think of it like with a backbeat in the background. I mean, just whatever helps you keep on track of feeling the rhythm correctly.
yeah,
It doesn't matter if it's eccentric or not.
yeah. Great.
You never know what you're going to learn in CSYO. This is fantastic.
That's excellent. Yeah.
Well, awesome. I think so. We're getting close to our time here, but I'm sure we have a few minutes, and I wonder if any of you out there in Zoom TV land might have any burning questions for John about the audition, about playing an orchestra, about his experiences, about his own music, maybe. So, any questions out there? Feel free to either put it in the chat bar, or if you want to use the raise hand icon, we can call you or call on you.
I have a question. So John, when you are listening to auditions, what do you listen for in orchestral auditions or orchestral excerpts that might be different from solo repertoire?
Oh, great question. Yeah, I listen for what I've mentioned to some of the players today, is this idea of having a concept of the whole piece, and even, like, shall we say, thinking not just as a member of a section or as a player, but even thinking with the mindset of a conductor, and having us, that the interpretation of a piece doesn't just come from a conductor, it comes from the whole ensemble. And that I love to hear an orchestral excerpt, shall we say, played with that larger awareness of what the part is within the music. It's funny. I mean, like, I should tell the students here, for Spoleto, I auditioned the entire orchestra, and I've done this now since I've been in my role as the resident conductor for 11 years. So I do all the auditions, and not all festivals do that, but for me, it's really important that I know every musician, and that I also, that we have a framework for sort of finding the right musicians that will fit together too. And I tell you, like, I have a system where I'm listening to people, and of course I'm giving scores to things like intonation and rhythm and all that stuff, but I'm also interested in the je ne sais quoi, the personality, and like that a musician exhibits musical intelligence. Because if they have that, sometimes, everyone will make mistakes, but do they have the intelligence to hear them themselves, to be aware that they made a mistake, and to figure out how to fix it, right? And so that's a quality I really look for too. And I mean, I think it applies at the professional level as well. Like, does a person have the capacity for self-correction and growth? Because we all have to keep growing, Yeah. That's a long answer, I guess. Sorry.
I love what you said there, John, about my French is terrible, the je ne sais quoi of a person, and what you can get to know about them. Because, when you think about an audition, chances are you're seeing a person for the very first time. And for you musicians, the conductor and the jury are seeing you for the very first time, most likely. And the only time they get to know you is that either 20 minutes for an audition, or in our case in CSYO, the 5 minutes of an audition or so, just because there's so many people to get through in a day. And I think you have to sort of really think about how you can, within the confines of the music, allow them to get to know you, because, the whole thing is to either win the job or get in the audition so you can be a part of this ensemble and be colleagues with the people there. And so the
Right.
only way for them to get to know you is what you can present on that day. So as much as it's always about, always what's on the page should be played is one of the largest factors. But if ever there's a point in which they can get to know you, especially in your solo music, as Miss Flynn was asking about this, you really got to take that opportunity.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, maybe one or two questions, depending on how many are out there. Let's see. So I'm sure throughout your life, John, you've had to deal with nerves as a performer and as a conductor. And this is one that we always ask, or I always ask, because I think it's something we all deal with. But it's always great to get different perspectives on it. So when it comes to being in an audition, or I don't know, anything, like how do you, deal with performance anxiety or nerves, or approach them in an audition in your time and experience with it?
Well, I'm glad you asked. It's interesting. I feel like it wasn't addressed enough for me when I was young. I did suffer from nerves, and sometimes played really badly at some auditions that I took myself. And a lot of it was just from lack of mental focus. And I learned then to like playing something, having played it beautifully by myself, practicing, thinking that I was doing really great, and then getting into the audition and my mind got in the way and my hands were shaking or whatever, and so for me, it was a process of learning to sort of visualize what the situation would be in advance, and focusing so much that I wasn't going to let it make me nervous, and that's different than, like, shall we say, the good kind of nervous that sometimes informs performance, and like, even, I will tell you, the first time I ever conducted at Lincoln Center in New York, I'd done hundreds of performances in my life, if not thousands. But I got up on the podium and I started conducting the orchestra, and I felt my knees shaking. Here I was conducting in New York with, and it was just because, wow, I'm finally here. And of course, over the duration of the performance, I was fine. But it does happen to you, and for all the reasons that all can sometimes accumulate into a moment. But perhaps, more practically, if you prepare and really know the music that you're playing, there's no reason to be nervous. That's easy to say, perhaps, but that it's nervousness really just is something that can get in the way of you being your best. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
Yeah. Any other burning questions out there? All right, I better not get any emails like, Mr. Gray, I wanted to ask this. Can you such? I'm just kidding. You can always do that.
Always email me too if you're so inclined.
We can certainly forward your email out to everyone there. Let's see. So maybe I'll come in with one more question. So we were lucky enough to have graduating some really wonderful students this year, and a number of them. I think maybe Ms. Flynn, is it a little over a dozen students that we had? Amelia, there's a little over a dozen that we have are graduating. A large number of that dozen, a large percentage of them are going to study music in college. Whether it be music performance or education, and a lot of the ones that are studying performance are interested in playing in an orchestra. And I wonder what might be your top 3 tips or something like that for starting now to prepare for a life of winning an audition, or even pursuing the life as an orchestral musician.
Sure. I mean, I would just encourage you and tell you that it's something that you can do. And like, we hear, we're always hearing, the scary stories of, the future of music and things like that. The thing is, you can do anything with music. You really can. And music is something that is, because it educates your whole person and it integrates mind, body, and emotions. It's one of the most beautiful things in the world that we have. And so we should study it. We should pursue it. And there's so many things you can do with a musical practice. And not everybody is going to be guaranteed that job in an orchestra. And even great musicians, it's like you'll come within a hair's breadth of like winning an audition and you don't. Or you find yourself in a different situation because you couldn't win an audition, but that doesn't mean that you still can't have a musical life and a musical practice and find ways to apply it. And even just, I know so many amazing musicians who've also, maybe done a different profession actually, but it was a great thing that they don't regret their degree in music. And I think that it's just such a worthwhile pursuit. And then you'll just see where it takes you. That's all you can do, is just take keep your love of music intact. If your circumstances with your teachers make it feel like you don't love music anymore, then get a new teacher. Because it's like you want to be in a place where you're nurtured and you can keep your love of music going, and just see where it takes you, what happens to you, what opportunities fall into your lap, because that's usually what happens to people. You can't guarantee anything in life or in this profession in particular. But by all means, it's a great time to go into music because we need more music in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And not just, as you mentioned, not just performing in an orchestra, but there's so many other jobs. Of course, like none of us would be here without music teachers. And
Right.
for every teacher out there, and I'm sure, and I don't know anybody's experience personally, but I can speak to my experience personally of having a teacher that made things unfun for a while. And not unfun in the good way that progresses you, but unfun is makes me want to leave music in and of itself. And getting a new teacher was the best thing for me. But there's being a teacher, there's also a music therapist. That's one of the occupations I have the most respect for. As someone who's not necessarily been in the hospital myself, but have been there for friends and family members. I've seen what it's like for someone to go through physical therapy, where it means getting better means going through a lot of discomfort and pain. Whereas when music therapists come by, it's you get to enrich someone's life right away. You don't have to make them uncomfortable. You actually get to make their life so much better, like immediately. Gosh, there's just so many things. There's jobs in music technology. In fact, one of our alums from 2 years ago is actually studying music technology right now. There's so many things you can do. And I personally feel like I've learned so many life lessons in the course of studying music that I didn't learn in the classroom, that I was supposed to learn in the classroom. But it just sort of didn't work out that way for the way that I learned. And this sort of experiential element of being with my colleagues and being in an orchestra and the rigors of learning an instrument are really what brought me there. So as you said,
I couldn't. Thank you. I want to add something for everybody and just tell you about something. So the Spoleto Festival is coming up in sort of a more reduced version, obviously, because most of the events will be outdoors. And because we can't do indoor events yet with an orchestra, we don't have an orchestra this year, which breaks my heart. But what we are going to be doing during the festival, which opens Memorial Day weekend, as you probably know, is every day of the festival, we're going to do a video profile of one of our orchestra members or alums, okay? And I hope you might tune in to watch these. They'll be about 7 minutes each every day of the festival. And you mentioned music therapy. The musicians are interviewed by a member of our music staff, Renata Rolfing, who's an amazing pianist. She helps us prepare the operas each year, but she's also a music psychotherapist. and she has a master's degree in music therapy. And she works with people on the mental aspects of music. And so she's conducting these interviews with our orchestra, some of our orchestra members, and I think they're going to be fascinating about how they sustained their musical practice during the pandemic, and they'll be playing some too. So, and I think one of the musicians featured will be one of your alums, Abigail Kent, the harpist, if I'm not mistaken. So, in any case, you might check that out.
Terrific. I think we would love to check that out.
Yeah.
See, any other questions before we conclude today?
Are there any questions about your auditions that are going to be due in 2 weeks? Any like questions about the application, about the video format?
Miss Flynn, how much do you want to bet we're going to get some questions later?
It's okay. You guys can email me anytime. Like, you guys can contact me anytime, but don't be shy here to ask any questions.
Oh.
Well, this is a really impressive group. The four of you played so beautifully. So thank you, and thank you for doing that. Yeah.
And thank you for joining us today, John. This is really, really insightful. I think, even though we didn't have a lot of questions, I think we all learned something here today. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
All right, well, this concludes our final Youth Orchestra virtual meeting. It was so great to see so many of you, and congratulations to Chloe, Margie, Athena, and Lauren for your performance today. Mr. Gray and I look forward to receiving your applications. To any of our seniors that might be logged on, stay in touch with us. You know, John is a great resource if you're ever interested in applying for Spoleto in the future. If you have any questions about the festival, we would be happy to connect you with John. Otherwise, we will see you guys soon. Have a fantastic summer. And thanks again.
Yeah, see y'all soon.
Thank you.